I'm not going back here.
Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today is about the no-buy challenge, this idea of committing to a full year of no non-essential spending. So, cutting everything except the absolute basics like food, rent, utilities. And the material we're looking at, it really frames this as a deeply transformative journey, even calling it a path to freedom.
Right, and it's hard to argue with the results they document. I mean, people are saving huge amounts of money, reducing their waste, and they seem to have this major philosophical shift away from just wanting stuff.
Exactly. But that brings us to the core of our debate today. The central question is really this. Is the extreme total restriction that's built into the no-buy year actually necessary for that change, or are the benefits really just a result of, mindfulness and discipline, things you could develop through, frankly, less restrictive methods?
And that's where I have a problem. I'm all for the goal, the liberation part sounds great, but I really question whether a temporary all-or-nothing ban is the best way to get a lasting change.
See, I think that all-or-nothing part is the whole point. My position is that the rigid restriction, the challenge itself, is the essential catalyst here. The source material is very clear about this. It emphasizes writing a clear list of what's off-limits and treating the year like a competition. That's what creates the focus and gives you a sense of, purpose and pride. This isn't about small tweaks. It's about shock therapy for that consumer impulse. And this intense focus, it forces these really uncomfortable but necessary behavioral changes, like being forced to use what you already have, digging out all those half-used shampoos or makeup you forgot about. That only happens when buying something new is completely off the table. And crucially, this is the only way to achieve the main goal, rewiring your brain to fight impulse. You have to remove the triggers, unsubscribing from emails, staying out of stores. The ban is what creates the friction you need to break free.
I hear that, and it sounds powerful. But I have to wonder if that friction creates permanent strength or just, temporary avoidance. The outcomes you're listing, reclaiming your time, financial stability, and especially this idea of redefining happiness around experiences instead of ownership, those are traits of real, deep-seated self-discipline, not just following a rule for a year. The material seems to make the transformation dependent on this extreme, time-limited thing. But if the whole point is to learn delayed gratification and mindful consumption, shouldn't those be ongoing, integrated practices? If your success is built on a temporary structure, it sets up this fragile situation where the good habits might just disappear the moment the clock runs out.
Well, that brings us right to our first point of contention then. Is total avoidance, the ban, the only reliable way to build self-control against a habit as ingrained as consumerism? The material's pretty explicit here. It says success hinges on minimizing exposure to temptation. It even likens it to a diet. You don't keep junk food in the house if you're trying to stop eating it. The challenge works because it forces you to avoid those triggers. It's basically an immersion program and doing without.
I'm just not convinced that avoidance alone is how you build self-control. I mean, sure, avoiding temptation is a great strategy, especially at the beginning of any habit change. But the ultimate goal, according to the material itself, is learning to delay gratification. And that's a psychological skill. It's about resistance. A ban doesn't really teach resistance, it just teaches avoidance. If you're never actually tested because you're in this protected bubble, are you really strengthening the mental muscle to say no when you're eventually faced with temptation again? You could even argue it sets you up for a massive rebound, a big spending binge the second the challenge is over.
But for a habit this deep, and let's be honest, consumer impulse is deep for a lot of people. You have to completely interrupt that neurological feedback loop. That's why the rigorous ban works. You're not trying to just moderate a lifelong habit, you're making a decisive break. If you just try to make small, incremental changes, the old habit loops are just too powerful. They'll almost always win. The material even points out that allowing even one non-essential purchase a month can completely undermine the whole psychological frame of the challenge. That severity is what gives it its power and its clarity.
But the counterpoint to that is right there in the material too. The fact that the guidelines tell people that falling off the wagon isn't failure, that they should just get back on track, that suggests the authors know that total restriction is incredibly difficult, maybe even unsustainable for most.
Well, it's a challenge. Of course, it's difficult.
Right, but that fragility points to the weakness of avoidance as a long-term tool. True transformation has to be about learning to handle temptation in the real world, not just hiding from it in a temporary, protected environment. If you need a calendar to tell you when you can and can't buy things, have you really achieved freedom?
Okay, that leads us right to the second big disagreement, the competition mindset. You see it as a flaw, but I see it as essential fuel. If the strictness is the friction, the competitive framing is what keeps you going. The source material highlights how seeing it as a challenge turns it from just restriction into a victory. It provides that purpose and pride you need to get through. Thinking, okay, let's just get through January, then February, that structure is vital for staying committed when your old habits are screaming at you. It's an external motivator that bridges the gap until the internal rewards, the real feeling of liberation, start to kick in.
I get the power of external motivation. I do. But I'd argue the game element might actually get in the way of the deeper philosophical goal. If the whole point is to redefine happiness away from consumerism, then relying on a competition might undermine that. The goal should be to get from, I can't buy this because of my no-buy challenge, to, I'm not buying this because I genuinely don't need it or want it. If you rely too heavily on external rewards, like winning a game you set for yourself, the behavior is less likely to stick around once that reward is gone. You might just end up still thinking about consumerism as a game to be won instead of a system to just disengage from.
I think you're misunderstanding the role of the challenge structure. It's not meant to be the permanent psychological model. It's the training wheels. You can't get to that deeper philosophical freedom without first getting through the practical difficulty of breaking the habit. The pride you get from winning the challenge keeps you compliant long enough to actually feel the financial and emotional benefits. And those then become the real, intrinsic reward. Without that structure, most people would just give up by March.
Perhaps, but is it really facilitating freedom, or is it just swapping one compulsion, the compulsion to buy, for another, the compulsion to win?
Let's turn to a really practical outcome then, the one that the ban and only the ban really facilitates. I'm talking about forced utilization, that humbling, rewarding phase of using up all your forgotten stuff. The half-empty bottles of lotion, the old craft supplies, the skincare that's about to expire. This huge decluttering and money-saving step only happens when buying new things is totally forbidden. The strict ban forces that use it or lose it mentality, and it makes you confront your own wastefulness. That moment of self-confrontation is powerful, and I don't think you can guarantee that with just intentional consumption.
I agree that using up what you have is a huge benefit, but I think you can get there just as effectively with a more sustainable, non-restrictive approach. For example, you could just implement a strict personal rule. You always finish a product before you buy a replacement. Or a one-in, one-out rule for clothes. You get the same result, less waste, more savings. The key driver there is mindfulness and intentional planning, not mandated deprivation. You build the discipline through a stable, integrated rule that you can follow for life, which is much less likely to cause that rebound effect than a temporary, all-out ban.
I'm just not convinced, because that assumes a level of discipline that many people who are drawn to this challenge just don't have yet. That's why they need the challenge in the first place. The no-buy here provides the motivation by taking the option off the table. It's the shock therapy needed to break the impulse cycle, which then makes that higher-level intentional planning even possible. The ban forces the humility. Little incremental rules are just too easy to cheat on when an impulse strikes. The clarity of a total ban is its strength.
But we still have to come back to stability. If the goal is liberation, the method has to lead to a stable, long-term state of freedom. The transformation, being more content, financially secure, that comes from the realizations people have during the year. The question is still whether you have to go through this extreme temporary challenge to develop those traits, or if sustained, moderate changes could get you to a more stable long-term shift. The no-buy year is great at accelerating that realization. Its weakness is that it relies on a temporary structure that demands perfect compliance.
And I still hold that the intensity of the no-buy rule is what's necessary to create the friction to truly break that cycle of impulse and gratification. It's a mandatory vacation from consumerism that allows you to finally realize that happiness, it really doesn't come from owning things.
And I maintain that the profound realizations like liberation from consumer compulsion are the real prize. So the focus should be on integrating that discipline over time to make sure the habits you form are strong enough to last in the real world, not just inside the artificial bubble of a temporary ban.
So whether someone adopts the strict structure for a rapid transformation or just uses the principles to build a more mindful life over time, the material makes a really compelling case for taking a hard look at our own buying habits and trying to find freedom somewhere else.
I agree. Both approaches really highlight the value in that, and they offer different paths for our listeners to think about, whether it's intensity or consistency that will best serve their own goals.
If you pause for just a moment and observe the environment around you, physical or digital, it's structured chaos.
It is.
And it's all designed to elicit one single response: acquisition.
Yeah, to get you to buy something.
We are constantly swimming in this flood of information, sure, but that information is overwhelmingly tailored to consumerism.
Completely. It's the flash sale notification that pops up on your phone.
Or the personalized ad that literally follows you from website to website.
And the perfectly curated influencer post,
Yeah.
Suggesting that the next best version of yourself is just one purchase away.
It's more than just background noise, isn't it? It feels like an engineered dopamine drip.
That's a great way to put it. We've become habituated to this cycle where a little micro hit of pleasure is tied directly to the moment of clicking buy or bringing something new home.
Right. That immediate but really fleeting satisfaction.
Exactly. And it quickly leaves us chasing the next novelty. It's become the background operating system of modern life.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, it just becomes exhausting and, of course, financially draining.
Absolutely. And that internal drive, that impulse that flares up when we see something new, whether it's a necessary upgrade or just some frivolous treat, it dictates so much of our time and energy.
It really does.
The listener who sent this material in was looking for a decisive way to break that pattern, to intentionally step off that consumer treadmill for a full year.
And that's our mission today. We're going to do a deep dive into the practice and the philosophy of the no-buy year challenge.
Yeah, and we're not just looking at the surface level stuff like the financial benefits. We want to extract the specific blueprint.
The practical mechanics, the profound psychological shifts, and honestly, the surprising freedoms that come from successfully pulling off a year-long elimination of non-essential spending.
We're really aiming to distill the core mechanism that turns what sounds like an exercise in deprivation into a true exercise in liberation. We need to go beyond the simple idea of budgeting and really analyze the behavioral engineering you need to sustain that kind of self-discipline for 12 full months.
And I think to start, we have to address the biggest misconception right out of the gate.
Okay.
When people hear no-buy year, they often picture this extreme, almost monastic austerity, cutting out everything, including enjoyment or even basic comfort.
Right, like you're going to be sitting in a dark room eating bread and water for a year.
Exactly. And that level of rigidity is just, it's unsustainable. It almost always leads to failure.
So that distinction is the foundational concept we need to get straight right now.
It is.
This is not about total abstinence. The sources are really clear on this. The no-buy year is defined as eliminating non-essential spending.
Right. Necessities like food, medicine, rent, utilities, all of that remains perfectly okay to buy.
The goal isn't starvation or homelessness.
No. The goal is surgical precision in cutting out the discretionary fluff. You must still buy milk. You have to pay your rent. You need to fill your prescriptions.
But you are systematically removing all the other items that just kind of sneak into your budget.
The impulsive beauty products, the unnecessary clothes that you see on sale, the little home decor upgrades.
All the things that drain your resources without providing any real lasting value.
That separation between need and want is the starting line. It's everything.
And if you can't clearly define that boundary between the two, you've already created the perfect excuse for temptation to win.
You've left the door wide open.
This recognition that clarity is the foundation of self-control. It brings us right into our first section, establishing the rules of engagement. So if this challenge is going to succeed, it requires establishing a fortress of clarity around every single transaction.
That's a really good way to think about it, a fortress.
And the most vital, the foundational step, according to all the accumulated experiences in this material, is the absolute necessity of writing a detailed, clear list of what is and what isn't allowed.
It sounds so administrative, doesn't it? Almost tedious.
Like homework.
Exactly. But this is the linchpin. We need to understand the psychological function of that list, because it's not just about remembering the rules.
Okay, so what is it doing on a deeper level?
Well, think about it. If the boundaries are left vague, if you just have a general idea of, I'm not going to buy stuff I don't need, then what happens?
You're forced to make a decision in the moment.
You're forced to engage in a high-stakes internal debate in the precise moment of temptation.
And we all know what happens in that moment.
We do.
Your rational brain, which is already running on a finite supply of daily decision-making energy,
Yes, your willpower.
it's pitted against the instant dopamine gratification of the purchase. The impulse is almost always going to win that fight.
It's an unfair fight. It's like sending an amateur into the ring with a heavyweight champion. Your tired, end-of-the-day brain doesn't stand a chance.
So the list is the workaround for that.
That's right. By writing the list beforehand, when your willpower is high, when you're calm and rational, you externalize the decision maker.
I like that. You're not asking your tired self in the checkout line, is this essential?
No. Instead, you are submitting the transaction to a pre-approved written document. The answer becomes a simple, totally emotionless verdict. Yes, it's on the approved list, or no, it's a forbidden exclusion.
It completely removes the need for mental labor right in the moment of weakness.
It does. It saves all that energy.
I find that fascinating because it directly addresses the concept of decision fatigue or ego depletion head on.
Tell us more about that.
Well, it's the idea that we have a limited reservoir of mental energy for self-control. So if you have to spend that energy every single day debating whether to buy a coffee, a shirt, a new gadget,
You're just draining the tank.
you deplete your mental resources, and the later decisions you have to make that day, often the more important ones, will be poor. The list is an energy conservation tool.
It is. It's an intellectual shortcut that protects your executive function. So the author got very specific about categorizing these boundaries.
Okay, so let's break that down.
We have the exceptions allowed, which are your true necessities. Basic food items, things like milk and bread. Hygiene staples like toilet paper.
Things you literally can't function without.
Right. Rent, medical necessities. The rule of thumb is, if stopping the purchase would compromise your health or safety, it is an exception. It's allowed.
But the real commitment, and where the real insight comes from, is in defining the exclusions, forbidden discretionary spending.
This is where the work is. This is the list that targets the impulse areas. Clothes, home decor, cosmetics, luxury goods.
Entertainment subscriptions you don't actually use.
Oh, that's a huge one. And expensive takeout meals that aren't budgeted necessities, but are just, because you don't feel like cooking.
So this is where the initial discipline is paramount, isn't it? Because defining these boundaries forces you to confront your existing habits.
And what the sources reveal is that the biggest area of initial conflict isn't the big-ticket items. Nobody's really debating whether they need new ADH TV. It's the little essential adjacent categories where people try to find loopholes.
Can you give us an example of a common loophole or a point of that kind of internal conflict?
Certainly. Let's take personal hygiene and beauty products. This is a classic one. Someone might argue that soap is essential.
And it is.
And it is. But what about a new specialty face serum that promises anti-aging benefits? Or a new shade of lipstick when you already own 10?
So it's about function versus desire.
Exactly. The successful execution of this demands that you define the category broadly. If you already possess a functional substitute, even if it's less desirable, like a bar of soap versus a fancy body wash, the new item is an exclusion.
If the primary purpose is aesthetic indulgence or, as you said before, mood management,
It is out. It goes on the no list.
so the list has to anticipate your own rationalizations.
You have to be your own lawyer, basically.
Because if the list just says no clothes, a person might loophole it by saying, well, my shoe soles wore out. Shoes are essential.
That's a perfect example.
So the list needs to be specific. It needs to say, replacements are only allowed when the existing item is completely non-functional, damaged beyond repair, and poses a safety risk.
And even then, it has to specify what kind of replacement is allowed.
Ah.
So it can be replaced with a basic non-luxury equivalent. You don't get to replace your worn-out running shoes with the latest, most expensive model. You get a functional pair of shoes. That's it.
Exactly. The author had to confront the difference between being functional and being fashionable.
A huge distinction.
The challenge forces you to look at your existing inventory and realize, I don't need a new outfit. I want a new outfit because I'm bored of my current rotation.
And the list acts as the legal contract, forcing you to abide by the truth of that necessity.
This foundational step, this creation of a personal spending constitution, is really where the challenge is won or lost before day one even starts.
Absolutely. If the list is vague, the year is going to be a series of frustrating failures. If it's rock solid, the infrastructure for success is built. So once that legal framework is established, the focus immediately shifts to your physical and your digital environment.
Right.
And this brings us to section 2, the practical shift. This is about utilizing your inventory and minimizing your exposure. This is where the real day-to-day effort happens.
The first highly tactical lesson is one that's profoundly humbling, but also really rewarding. Using what you already have. This moves the person from just restricting future purchases to actively engaging with their past spending.
And the source material provides such vivid detail here, particularly around personal care and beauty products. It's almost comical.
What did she find?
The author described this eye-opening process of conducting a full home inventory. She went through every cabinet, every drawer, and what she found was a scattered collection of forgotten capital.
Forgotten capital, I like that.
Half-used specialty shampoos, multiple bars of soap tucked away in a linen closet, expired makeup, skincare products she bought on impulse 6 months prior and never even opened.
We've all been there. It's the graveyard of good intentions, those products we bought with so much enthusiasm, used once or twice.
And then stowed away when a shinier, newer product came along.
Forgetting the sunk cost and the sheer waste of it all.
The power of the no-buy commitment was that it forced her to become a ruthless curator and user of her own resources. She had to systematically finish every single product she already owned before allowing herself to buy even the most essential replacement.
And this yielded a triple victory, right?
A triple victory. Massive savings, of course, that's the obvious one. But also an immediate, significant physical decluttering of her home.
And crucially, an environmental win.
A huge one.
That's the part that is often invisible until you take this step. You realize you basically have a personal manufacturing plant in your bathroom cabinet. You've already paid for this stuff, and now you have the labor of deciding what to do with it.
Well, and the author noted the profound waste implication of it all. Without the no-buy commitment, most of those items, the half-used bottles, the forgotten lotions, would have just sat there.
They'd have aged out, expired.
Been quietly stored away, and then eventually thrown directly into the bin representing wasted money, wasted manufacturing resources, and just unnecessary contributions to a landfill.
It shifts your perspective entirely, doesn't it?
Completely.
You stop seeing a half-empty bottle of shampoo as almost done or old, and you start viewing it as a valuable prepaid resource that must be utilized completely.
It changes you from a consumer of novelty to a deliberate manager of resources.
And once you acknowledge the sheer volume of things you already own, the next lesson becomes glaringly obvious.
It does. You have to protect yourself from the temptation to acquire more. Success hinges on proactively reducing your exposure to the triggers that initiate that consumer impulse.
We so often talk about willpower as the solution, but the sources make it really clear that relying on willpower alone against the sheer might of modern retail architecture is a losing battle.
It's an absolute losing battle. This goes right back to ego depletion. If you continually expose yourself to triggers, you just exhaust your ability to resist.
So the successful strategy is not to fight the impulse.
It's to prevent the impulse from being triggered in the first place.
So we need to move past the simple advice of just avoid the mall, because I think our audience already knows that.
Yeah.
What specific proactive tactics did the author adopt against the architecture of modern temptation?
The tactics were comprehensive, and they covered both physical and digital space, which is key.
Okay, let's start with the physical.
Physically, it meant avoiding places where purchases are incidental. So not just clothing boutiques, but stores like Target or home goods places.
Oh yeah, Target is the classic example.
It's deliberately engineered to foster unplanned impulse purchases through pleasant atmosphere and strategic placement of appealing unnecessary items. They're designed to encourage browsing.
And browsing is the gateway drug to spending.
Absolutely.
They design the store so you have to walk past the seasonal decorations and the $5 impulse bin just to get to the milk in the back corner.
Precisely. And then on the digital front, the detox has to be just as ruthless.
What does that look like?
It means religiously unsubscribing from all marketing emails, not just deleting them.
No, you have to actively click unsubscribe.
You have to actively opt out of the subscription, cutting the digital breadcrumbs that lead right to your bank account. It also involves blocking specific websites during certain times of day, using browser extensions to block ads entirely.
And critically, this one is huge. Ceasing the consumption of haul content, product reviews, or recommendation videos.
Oh, this is a non-negotiable.
That digital consumption is so insidious because it doesn't feel like shopping. It feels like entertainment or research.
Yeah. Right, I'm just watching, I'm not buying.
But watching someone unbox new items or rave about the latest trend is essentially priming your brain for dissatisfaction with what you currently own.
It manufactures FOMO, the fear of missing out on this perceived upgrade.
It capitalizes on all the deep psychological triggers that modern advertisers have perfected over decades.
Think of the scarcity tactics, the limited time offer, or the only 3 left in stock notifications.
Urgency.
These are engineered to bypass your rational decision-making and trigger a fight-or-flight purchase response. To win the no-buy year, you have to implement firewalls against these stimuli.
I remember a really sophisticated tactic mentioned in the sources. Using your phone settings to reduce visual appeal, like putting your phone into grayscale mode. Why would that be a successful strategy?
That's a highly advanced strategy, and it recognizes how much consumer desire relies on visual stimulation.
The pretty colors.
The vibrant colors of new packaging, the vivid displays on retail websites. By putting your phone in grayscale, you literally strip away the visual excitement.
So it makes scrolling social media or browsing a shopping site far less engaging.
Less stimulating, and therefore less tempting. You are removing the reward signal from the activity itself. It becomes boring.
That demonstrates the level of commitment required here. It's not about being slightly careful. It's about actively engineering your environment for success.
You have to recognize that the human brain is easily hijacked by the retail environment.
So you remove the trigger entirely. And by doing that, you conserve your willpower for things that actually matter.
It shifts the entire focus from relying on a finite resource willpower to relying on an infinite resource structural avoidance. You're building a mental defense system that just operates passively in the background.
Okay, so moving beyond the physical logistics and into the inner landscape of the challenge, we arrive at section 3, the mindset game.
This is a big one.
Because the rules and the avoidance tactics, they'll get you through the first few weeks, maybe the first month. But sustaining this for 365 days requires a complete rewiring of how you perceive restriction itself.
This is where the psychological transformation truly begins. The author found that framing the experience as a challenge or a game, as a competition to be won, was hugely transformative.
It reframed the entire commitment from a burden into a motivator.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on, I can't have this, the focus shifts to, I am winning this.
Every day without an unplanned purchase is a point scored. Every successful month is a level completed.
It harnesses positive psychology and our natural competitive instincts. It's brilliant, really.
And the author's strategy was to create manageable milestones, right? Not just looking at the full year.
Right, because a full year is so intimidating. The thinking was, let's just get through January without a slip-up. Okay, we did that. Now let's see if we can maintain the streak into February.
It prevents the monumental task of 365 days from feeling completely overwhelming.
And the result is a profound identity shift. You move from the identity of a shopper or someone who's struggling with self-control
To the identity of a winner or someone committed to mastery.
That sense of purpose and pride transforms self-restraint from self-denial into a form of victory. It becomes about competence and intellectual mastery over manufactured desire.
And that feeling of competence is its own reward, isn't it?
It is. It's a powerful, sustained satisfaction that easily overshadows the fleeting pleasure of a cheap purchase. It creates a whole new, positive feedback loop based on discipline rather than on consumption.
Now, in any long-term challenge, we have to address the elephant in the room.
The slip-up.
The inevitable mistake.
Unplanned purchases happen. Stress hits, exhaustion takes over, or a genuine, albeit minor, need arises that wasn't covered by the list. How does the philosophy accommodate the inevitability of human error without causing a total collapse?
This is so crucial for long-term psychological resilience. The author provides a deeply forgiving, but also immediately demanding philosophy.
Okay, how does that work?
Falling off the wagon is not failure. If you make an unplanned purchase, you do not declare the entire year ruined and immediately go on a spending spree. Which is a phenomenon known in behavioral economics as the what the hell effect.
That's it. That spiral of guilt-fueled failure. You break your rule, you decide you've ruined the whole effort, and you use that initial failure as justification to abandon the goal completely. What the hell, I already messed up, might as well buy everything.
So what's the antidote?
The antidote is immediate re-engagement. The goal is transformation, not perfection. If you make a mistake on day 150, you haven't invalidated the 149 days of mindfulness that came before it.
Right.
You simply acknowledge the lapse. Maybe you take a minute to analyze why it happened. Was it boredom? Stress? Exposure to a trigger? And then you immediately resume the challenge as if nothing happened.
Every conscious step away from impulsive consumption still counts as progress toward the greater goal of behavior change.
Exactly.
That forgiveness is key because it prevents that corrosive combination of shame and guilt from taking root and destroying the whole project.
It does.
But I do have a question here. Did the sources discuss any negative psychological impacts of this level of restriction? Is there a risk of, say, rebound spending later, or fostering an unhealthy perfectionism, almost like an orthorexia, but for finances?
That's a vital, critical point. And while the author focused heavily on the benefits, any challenge involving extreme restriction carries risks. You have to be aware of that.
So how do you guard against that?
Well, the sources implicitly guard against perfectionism by institutionalizing that forgiveness for slip-ups, emphasizing that the trajectory matters more than isolated perfection.
Okay.
However, it's essential for anyone undertaking this challenge to monitor for an unhealthy sense of shame or compulsion that becomes too rigid. If the challenge is fostering anxiety rather than liberation, the philosophy has been misapplied. The goal is mastery, not martyrdom.
Understood. But when the challenge is successfully applied, what is the ultimate non-financial reward? It seems to boil down to rewiring the brain against impulse itself.
Precisely. This is the cornerstone of the whole endeavor, the development of delayed gratification.
Talk about that.
Before the challenge, the author described her buying habits as just. She bought things because she wanted them. It was about the immediate pleasure of instant gratification. The feeling was intense, but it was fleeting, and often replaced by buyer's remorse within hours.
And the relentless discipline of the no-buy year forces the brain to practice the complete opposite skill, resisting that instant reward.
The mechanism of how that develops is really critical here. When an impulse to buy strikes, you have zero options for an immediate reward. You're forced to sit with that desire.
That sounds uncomfortable.
It is, at first. But the most successful participants, the sources suggest, implement a mandatory cooling-off period. The most common one is the 72-hour rule for any non-essential item, even those bordering on the exception list.
The 72-hour rule, giving yourself 3 full days to think about the purchase.
And during that time, the impulsive spike of desire is almost guaranteed to subside.
It allows the prefrontal cortex, the rational decision-making center of your brain, to override the primitive limbic system, which is the part that's screaming, buy now.
And you find that most items that seemed absolutely vital on Monday morning are entirely forgotten by Thursday afternoon. The desire simply fades when it's denied that immediate reward.
And this delay doesn't just manage finances, it manages emotions. This is the core realization we really wanted to expand on.
Yes.
The author learned that the buying impulse was often a substitute for dealing with deeper emotional states. Boredom, anxiety, stress.
Yes. The profound realization was that she didn't need to buy something to feel good. She had been using retail therapy as a cheap, temporary fix for emotional discomfort.
And the challenge forces you to confront the real underlying issues.
It does. Instead of reaching for the credit card when you're stressed, you're forced to ask, why am I stressed? What do I truly need right now? A new lipstick or a 20-minute walk outside?
So what structural alternative replaced that quick, temporary fix of retail therapy?
The sustained satisfaction of self-control. This cognitive reframing, realizing that discipline itself provides a deeper, more robust, and longer-lasting form of fulfillment than the purchased object ever could. That is the greatest return on investment.
So the no-buy year starts as a financial challenge.
But it ends as an emotional and psychological masterclass. It trains you to manage your internal states through competence and discipline, not through external acquisitions. With that psychological foundation laid, let's discuss the tangible and profound measurable returns, moving into section 4.
Okay.
Because beyond the mental shift, the author found major unexpected rewards in time, the environment, and a redefined sense of happiness.
Let's start with the non-financial benefit that surprised the author the most. Reclaiming time and energy. It sounds counterintuitive, but stopping shopping somehow gives you more hours in the day.
It's because of the sheer volume of invisible labor that's associated with consumerism that she hadn't recognized before.
What do you mean by invisible labor?
We aren't just talking about the 30 minutes you spend paying for something. We're talking about the hours consumed by all the peripheral activities.
Like comparing prices online for hours.
Comparing prices, reading reviews, browsing shelves while you're waiting for an appointment, driving to the store, physically returning items that didn't fit or weren't right.
Oh, returns are a huge time suck.
And just the endless mental energy spent organizing and storing and maintaining all your new acquisitions.
So when you combine all that research, the comparison shopping, the post-purchase management, it's a significant weekly time sink.
She gained hours of unstructured time each week simply by cutting off that consumer stream.
And unstructured time is crucial. It's the raw material for growth.
But only if you use it correctly.
Yeah.
If you simply replace online shopping with passive social media scrolling, you haven't really solved the problem.
So what does she do with that time?
The author found that this reclaimed time naturally flowed into active self-improvement activities, intentional decluttering of her existing possessions.
So using the time to deal with the past consumption.
Exactly. Channeling energy into reading books she already owned and had never gotten around to.
Right.
And dedicating time to cultivating new skills and hobbies that required focused attention, not more monetary input.
So she moved from passive consumption to active creation, filling the time with purposeful endeavors that actually built long-term value rather than just accumulating short-term distractions.
Exactly. And now let's connect that philosophical gain to the very practical, tangible benefits.
Right.
The dual wins for the environment and for your finances.
Okay, environmentally, the impact seems really visceral. By committing to using up what she owned, she reduced her physical waste stream and created a new level of awareness.
The environmental benefit is far more profound than just reducing your recycling volume. It forces an awareness of the entire life cycle of consumer goods.
You mean from production to disposal?
Right. When you are forced to use your existing items, you become acutely aware of the unnecessary packaging, the limited shelf life, the quality or lack thereof, and the ultimate destination of the things you purchase.
The author was shocked by the volume of perfectly usable prepaid items that were near expiration simply because she kept bringing in new, novel replacements.
That awareness is so powerful. It stops being this abstract idea about global waste, and it becomes a personal reckoning with your own consumption footprint right in your own home.
And financially, the result is obvious, but its mechanism is important to emphasize, isn't it?
It is. The author ended the year with substantial savings.
Mm.
But this financial freedom came not from cutting essential items or being miserly.
Right. She wasn't suffering.
No. It came specifically from avoiding purchases that, in retrospect, never truly added value or solved any real problem.
That's the critical takeaway. The savings are not a byproduct of suffering. They are pure profit derived from better, more mindful decision-making.
You're just realizing that the majority of discretionary spending is dedicated to chasing fleeting pleasures or solving manufactured needs.
Which culminates in the philosophical apex of the entire experience, the redefinition of happiness.
This is the author's most profound, lasting takeaway from the whole 12-month commitment.
The conclusion that happiness does not come from owning things, that satisfaction is not externally conferred by possessions,
but comes instead from internal sources, experiences, strong relationships, and living a disciplined, purposeful life.
And that craving, that persistent internal chatter that was driving her to shop, it dissipated over the year.
It did. She discovered she didn't miss the act of shopping itself. The void was filled not by a replacement activity, but by internal fulfillment, the pride in her creativity, the satisfaction of her discipline.
And the profound feeling of liberation that comes from simply not needing more.
The narrative of modern life tells us that novelty is necessary for happiness. The no-buy year proves that the opposite is true.
Liberation comes from realizing you are sufficient exactly as you are, regardless of your wardrobe size or the latest gadget in your home.
It's a total inversion of the cultural value system. The author found that the most valuable assets, time, self-control, and contentment, are non-monetary, and their accumulation is directly tied to the intentional restriction of material acquisition.
So what does this all mean for you, for the listener who's considering this path? We started with the chaos and engineered stimuli of modern consumer culture, and we found a crystal clear, actionable blueprint for achieving profound freedom from it.
The success of the no-buy challenge is really rooted in several non-negotiable pillars that we've derived from this deep dive.
Okay, let's recap them.
First, the intellectual honesty and clarity established by that written list. It eliminates ambiguity and decision fatigue.
Second, the proactive structural strategy of avoiding triggers, those digital and physical firewalls, to conserve your finite willpower.
And third, the profound psychological skill of delayed gratification that it instills, which turns self-control into its own source of sustained emotional reward.
This is so much more than a financial experiment. It's a foundational redesign of one's relationship with time, with self-worth, and with the external world.
It is. And the final assessment from the author really reinforces the massive scope of this transformation.
Well, what was her final word on it?
She calls the no-buy year one of the best things I ever did, emphasizing that it transformed her into a more mindful, more content, and fundamentally more financially secure individual.
It taught her how to generate satisfaction internally rather than trying to purchase it externally.
Yes. And she ends by framing the challenge not as some form of ascetic punishment, but explicitly as a path to freedom.
Freedom from the constant compulsion, the misplaced desire for novelty, and the tyranny of always feeling like you need something new.
It's a personal liberation movement disguised as a budgeting exercise.
And if you are considering applying these principles, this mastery of delayed gratification and self-control, here's the thought to carry with you today as you reflect on the power of this psychological shift.
We've seen how consciously applying self-control to spending unlocks time, money, and peace of mind.
Now consider this question. If you have spent a year mastering the skill of delaying gratification in your finances, what happens when you consciously apply that exact, newly mastered skill? That ability to resist an instant reward for a long-term goal to the next year.
What major life goals, entirely beyond consumption, could you finally unlock by training this one transferable mental muscle?
Whether it's consistent fitness, career development, or mastering a difficult new skill.
The challenge of consumption might just be the most potent training ground for mastery in every other area of your life. Focus on the transformation, not the transaction.
A powerful provocation indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the profound freedom found in saying no.